All right, so this microphone is absolutely going to die at some point because I think its battery was on its last legs on Wednesday, and I didn't request more batteries because I forgot and I have other things to do. Okay, drag this out of the way so I don't trip over my own stuff as I pace around like a psychopath. Okay, so let's say I won't get to say this tomorrow because I don't have class. Beware the Ides of March. Sorry, Shakespeare quote. Had to throw in some Shakespeare. Julius Shakespeare was warned to beware the Ides of March, or the 15th of March, by a soothsayer in Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, and he's killed by the entire Senate on March 15th. So, beware the Ides of March. Something bad always happens on the 15th. Okay, I'm kidding. What is happening? My computer's frozen? No, I'm good. Okay, I must erase my ink. All right, so, I don't know, do I have a question slide somewhere? All right, no questions, all good. So, we were talking last time a little bit about religion. Obviously, we've been talking for a few classes. We've moved into talking about Gen Z and religion through this springtide data. So, a couple of things I wanted to kind of note here, and then we'll go into kind of our, oh, sorry. Yes, I can. Better? Okay. Beware the Ides of March. It's one of the few Shakespeare plays I've never seen staged. However, I will be going soon to A Midsummer Night's Dream, the 70s musical. So I don't know how that's going to be, but it should be fun. Okay. The orange pen. What was I saying? Let's just go home. No, I'm kidding. Oh, yes. Okay. I was writing an exam last night until like 2 in the morning, so I'm semi-coherent today. So we're talking about this springtide data, right? We were talking about this last time. We're talking about Gen Z. They're looking at kind of Gen Z and religion. We'll come back to springtide when we get to, I almost dropped my pen. When we talk about springtide again when we get to mental health. We have a unit between this and mental health, and we'll talk about flourishing again. But kind of like what we saw in the National Study of Youth and Religion, Springtide asked some questions about kind of what they called flourishing, right? Or flourishing a lot here. Basically how people are doing, right? Based on, like this one's a self-report. So I will say, like when we looked at, all of that data from the National Study of Youth and Religion, I think that data is a fair bit more robust, right? Because it's asking about like things like risk behaviors, parental relationships, romantic relationships, all sorts of things, moral reasoning behavior, all of this kind of stuff. I think that data is a lot more robust than what Springtide has done here. What they did is they basically asked, do you feel like you're flourishing a lot in these kind of aspects of their lives, right? So it's a self-report about how they feel they're doing. So way less kind of, I would say objective from a kind of quantitative perspective. But I still think it's kind of interesting. And again, they broke this sample down, for us. Like they have the data, and you can go download it out of their database and play around with it. if you wanted to, basically they took the most religious part of their sample and the not religious at all part of their sample, and they wanted to look at what the differences were in terms of how much people said they were flourishing. And you can see that, again, we're talking about pretty substantial differences. Now, if I may venture, there are some things in general that I think are concerning about this, right? So none of these, like on this first one, even for our very religious part of the sample, none of them approach really, well, I guess these two get near a majority, but all of the other ones, right, they're below majority in terms of where they feel like they're flourishing a lot. And the only ones that say they're flourishing a lot, more than 50%, right, so a majority, is the very religious saying they're flourishing a lot at home. So this, I think, is concerning, right? We would like more of our young people to say that they are flourishing a lot. That said, once again, the most religious part of this sample that Springtide took seems like they're doing considerably better in terms of even their own understanding of whether they are flourishing a lot, right? So in terms of romantic relationships, we got here a 14% gap, right? And it's, less than a quarter of our non-religious part of the sample that says they're flourishing a lot. Here you're better than a third, but in terms of friendships. But again, the more religious part of the sample seems to think they're doing better. Family relationships, right? Again, a 20% gap, so that's pretty substantial. A fifth more, if you want to put it like that. Here, a quarter more, right? Relationships with trusted adults. And again, I'll come back to stressing this a little bit later. And I know I keep teasing you, and I'm sorry. I'm a big tease when it comes to this stuff. This number, I think, matters quite a lot. And again, I kind of stressed it a couple of times, when we're talking about network closure and the National Study of Youth and Religion, we're looking at those numbers showing that, the devoted, sorry, I'm getting a cold, I think, or I was in a horse barn last night. I don't know which one is affecting me more. But my lung capacity feels like, a 2-pack-a-day smoker at this point. So I might start coughing randomly. But, okay, so our most religious part of the sample, National Study of Youth and Religion, had more caring adults, right? They were more connected. And I think, we see here that the most religious part of this sample was substantially more likely to say they're flourishing a lot in their relationships with trusted adults, right? Only 16% of the non-religious part of the sample. I really wish they had, that they'd broken this data down a little bit more to show us some of that middle group, like how's the middle group doing, between very religious and not religious at all, but they didn't. Okay, so same thing when we look at other aspects, right? At work, a 20% gap, a third or a little bit more than a third of the very religious say they're flourishing at work compared to 14%. At home, right, this is a fifth more, right? And half of our very religious part of the sample say that they are doing well. In finances, I don't know where 15 to 22-year-olds feel like they're struggling so much financially. But here, right, very, very small number of our not at all religious part of the cohort. Physical health and well-being, right? We see the same kind of gap that we saw in the National Study of Youth and Religion, right? With things like body image and overall health. That most religious part of the sample feels like they're doing better. In mental health, and again, we're going to do a whole lot on mental health starting next week at some point, and they feel like they're flourishing a lot more, right? A quarter more. And in online, social and online life, right? Still a gap. That's one of the smaller ones that are here, but they feel like they're flourishing a lot there. So again, I think what's maybe worth just kind of thinking about, just in broad strokes, we see the same kind of effect holding, and again, it's not as robust. I don't want to say that this is as robust as the National Study of Youth and Religion. It's really not as good of data, but it is a data point that suggests that, again, a generation on, now we're still talking about 13 to kind of 25-year-olds in this Springtide data, right? So, exactly where that first generation, exactly where the participants were in that first wave of the National Study of Youth and Religion, they're still doing better, right? We still see the very religious doing better. So what we can suspect is that probably what Smith and Denton reported is still holding, at least to some extent, right? That religion seems to matter, right? In the lives of young Americans, religion seems to matter, and for that most religious part of the sample, it seems to lead to these better life outcomes, to them saying that they are flourishing a lot. Okay, we should move on. Okay, so I want to present one last concept on religion here. Oh, that took a while. All right. If nothing else, my parents always knew I knew how to talk. I think most of the time they thought I wouldn't shut up, but which is my two boys as well are just like that. So everything goes round and round. Okay, so we're going to talk about this concept, faith unbundled. So you can think in a sense of faith unbundled as being, sort of equivalent, not in terms conceptually, but in terms of, thinking about Gen Z. If there's a concept that encapsulated millennial faith, right? It was moralistic therapeutic deism. When it comes to Gen Z, it's faith unbundled. Okay, so this comes from the same report, and the term was sort of coined by this guy. His name is Josh Packard. At the time, he was the kind of founding director of Springtide Institute. He's since moved on, and I believe now he's working for the National Association of Catholic Educators in the U.S. He's a good social science researcher. I always really like Josh's stuff. It's really interesting, and I've gotten to interact with him a few times. He's a really nice guy, and really, I think the concept that he came up with is really interesting. And the way that he kind of talked about it is, and I like this, Spotify as a religious metaphor as faith, and he calls this faith unbundled. Okay, so what does this mean, right? You could also put like Netflix as a religious metaphor, and it would work just as well. So what is faith unbundled? Okay, unbundled. So what Packard says is that it describes the way young people are increasingly construct their faith by combining elements such as belief, identity, practices, and community from a variety of religious and non-religious sources, rather than receiving all these things from a single intact system or tradition. Okay, so why is this like Spotify? So you have to be, maybe you have to be my age to understand, I don't know. If we went back in time a little bit, right? If you wanted to consume music, right, you were buying, albums, right? So you were buying probably CDs when I was growing up. If you went back a little bit older than me, you were buying audio cassettes. If you went back even a little bit further, you were buying records, right? But you would buy like, I don't know, the Beatles, you would buy the White Album or Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Band, and you would have all of those songs, and you would throw it on the record player or in your CD player, and you'd listen to the whole album. But obviously, that's not how we do things anymore. Now you have your Spotify, right? Or Apple Music or whatever service you have, and you kind of combine your playlists with just whatever you want. And it's very hodgepodge, right? It's going to be a little bit of music from this person, a little bit of music from this person, maybe 5 songs from one artist, 10 songs from another, and then one song from one artist, one song from another. Throw in some classical music because you like that one piece, and it's just a kind of a conceptual mess. There's no kind of unity to it, but what is it? Well, actually, it's just you, right? It's a music experience all your own that's very much individual to you as a person. And what Packard is sort of suggesting is that what Gen Z is increasingly doing with religion is precisely this. Rather than, how to put it, you were born, let's say, Catholic, right? Or Hindu or Muslim or evangelical. Oop, that's a highlighter. Failing at life again, right? You were born Catholic, a couple generations back, and you were Catholic. You were taught Catholic things, even things that you maybe didn't like. You would have sort of accepted them as part of what it means to be, Catholic or Protestant or Muslim or Hindu or Jewish or whatever. But what Packard says is for Gen Z, this isn't how they're doing things. They're going to take, some Catholic stuff, maybe some, New Age, maybe some, Judaism, we'll say Judaism. Maybe you're into like Kabbalah bracelets or something. It's very 2005 Kabbalah bracelets, but maybe you're a holdout, right? Maybe you combine some elements of Buddhism in there, right? Some transcendental meditation, and you kind of put together a religion of one, right? And suddenly your religious experience is kind of a religion of one. How many adherents to Alaism? Just one, right? I'm sorry, I just used it as an example. And it's got just the elements that really work for you. Okay, so what does he say? Today's young people no longer rely on a single institution to make sense of their identity, engage community, outline boundaries of belief, or practice that mark significant life moments. And here I think, the quote of the hour, religion is not a closed system for Gen Z, but an open system that kind of flows in and out of other systems, such as science, ecology, socialization, politics, and relationships, right? They all kind of flow together, and you grab elements from wherever it makes sense to construct a sort of religious identity. Okay. So, and I'll make before I leave, remind me to make a point about the difference between this and moralistic therapeutic deism. Because I think in some ways there are similarities, but I got to ask Josh about it. And he sort of set me straight as to his thinking on MTD. Anyway, he doesn't like the concept, which is fine, even though it's a good concept. Okay, so here, question number 1. What does it look like to unbundle belief from a single source or system? So what does the belief structure here kind of look like? So young people turn to various sources when making meaning and discerning what to believe about right and wrong, purpose, and calling, salvation, suffering, and more. It looks like curiosity. Okay, now, a lot of this makes sense, right? And a lot of this, I think, follows the same thread lines that we've been talking about through the entire course, right? Like the things that we started with at the beginning of the course when we were talking about generations, Twenge's book, and the concepts that go, and it's, individualism. Gen Z is the most individualistic generation on record. I think, and here maybe we didn't talk about it as much, I guess we've talked about it in this unit, we have pluralism, right? We live in an incredibly pluralistic tradition. So if you went back to, say, the baby boomers, right? If you were looking for religious traditions that you could use to make meaning, likely you would have had 2 broad traditions, right? You would have had your Protestants, and you would have had your Catholics. And you would have had, a few maybe minority religion, like, oops, what am I writing? Judaism, right? Judaism. But mostly, your options were sort of, either Catholic, Protestant, maybe atheist, maybe communist, right? But there's just not a ton of options there in terms of religious practices. Today, right, like you can walk down the hall just on your way to your next class, and you're going to encounter people of, more religions than you can probably even actually remember, right? There's every kind of religion on this campus that you could imagine. So today, with this pluralistic culture, people have a lot more options. And this is kind of what Josh reflects on when he was coming up with this concept and looking at this research. One of the things he said was he assumed that, if young people were looking, they would do something like make a choice that looks kind of like this: the rosary or tarot cards, right? Because if you don't know, the rosary is a Catholic prayer instrument, right? It's been around for ages. Catholics love to pray the rosary. And tarot cards, right, are sort of a more new age kind of spiritual instrument. Excuse me. And so what Packard said is like, well, if they want to do the tarot thing, they're going to jettison the rosary thing. But what he found was that actually in their descriptions, they had an and, right? Or you could put it this way, like it's a both and. Both the rosary and tarot, right? This is how they were constructing their identity. And, okay, let me give you another term to think about. Oops, I want to erase everything. Another kind of way to think about it is that religious practice is instrumental or instrumentalized. It's just a set of tools for meaning making, right? It's just a set of tools for meaning making, and just like in a home construction project, right? You would grab whatever tools make sense for that job. You don't have to be like, well, I'm a hammer person, so to assemble this bookshelf, the only tool I'm going to use is a hammer because I'm a hammer person, right? It's the same kind of thinking here. It's like, well, to assemble this shelf, I need an Allen wrench, a whole bunch of glue, and a lot of patience, right? If it comes from IKEA. And it's probably still going to fall down, and the back is going to come out because those stupid little nails they give you never hold anything, and all of that kind of stuff. But you choose the tools that fit the job, and it's the same kind of thinking that Gen Z has when it comes to religion. You choose the tools that fit the job, right? And it's whatever works for you, right? If you are, if some particular aspect of religion, even one that you belong to, doesn't work, you jettison it and you pick something else. And it can come from almost anywhere. And what Packard says is that this looks like curiosity, right? You have young people who are very curious about all of these religious practices that are out there in the world that they could grab, they could use, right? And they will kind of pick and choose from the ones that they find appealing. Okay, so that's belief. I guess we'll keep clearing things off. So what does it look like to unbundle identity from a single system? And I think this matters as well, right? Because I think this tells us a lot about Gen Z. And again, Gen Z, they're individualistic, right? They very much care about their own identities that they've constructed or are constructing in very particular ways. So, what does Packard say? So unbundling identity from a single source, right? In the past, right? You would have been like, I'm Catholic, or I'm Jewish, or I'm, Episcopalian. And that was a very solid identity, and you kind of took it wholesale. And I guess, I want to speak for other people, but the pieces that didn't maybe fit, right, that you were uncomfortable with, it just kind of pushed those aspects, of yourself to the side, because this is how, a good Catholic act is this. What Packard is saying is that's less true with Gen Z. And I think this holds for millennials as well, but we're talking about Gen Z right now. And what he suggests is, and I like the way he phrases it, young people are unwilling to shed a part of themselves to fit into prescribed narratives about who and how to be in the world. So Gen Z, right? They're not going to compartmentalize who they are, put parts of their identity, parts of things that they care about to the side to fit into these pre-prescribed narratives. They want to bring their whole self to whatever communities they are a part of, whatever groups they are a part of. They don't want to hide who they are, right? And this is very critical to Gen Z. Being yourself, being who you are, like your authentic self, is incredibly important. And so religion, to the extent that they adopt it, is going to be adopted to the extent that they can sort of bring their whole selves to it, right? Okay. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay. What does it look like to unbundle community from a single system? What he says here is it looks like young people who show up where there are trusted personal relationships exist, or new ones seem possible, right? So they will show up to communities where they feel like they can create, of course they're bringing their wholeness, right? They want to bring themselves wholeheartedly to these communities, but they will go to those places where they have existing relationships or where relationships seem possible, and they'll forego those, where participating in the community lacks these qualities, even if they've been long associated with them. And I will say, because like when you pay attention to certain kind of cultural spaces, and here like I think of like some para-Christian groups that I sort of keep track of in my head. Groups like Young Life is one of them, who've had a very successful but very relational model for trying to kind of, get young people to participate in their activities and join their group. And, with the idea of becoming Christian at the end, they kind of figured this out probably about 25 years ago, that young people were shifting in this very relational direction, and that they needed to make that same pivot. But most religious groups haven't quite figured that out, right? Most of them are still stuck, I think, in a much more like, I think of my beloved Catholics, who are very much like, and I know a lot of Catholics like this, like, well, we have the truth, we're the one true church, so people should just want to come to us, right? We're just going to stand here and wait until that happens, right? I don't know why I did that with my teeth. It's very disrespectful. But I've certainly known a lot of people with that sort of attitude, but it's not what Gen Z works, and I think young millennials were kind of similar. Okay, so what does it look like to unbundle practices from a single source or system, right? You adapt various rituals and behaviors to suit and make sense of your current questions. And it's a kind of ideological flexibility, right? So again, it's you're not needing to be like, I find, what's the one that always gets people in trouble in Catholicism? I think it's called centering meditation. It's a practice from Buddhism. Can I actually, you know what? Here, I'm going to give you the example. This is my favorite. Yoga. I know a lot of like really traditional Catholics who are really opposed to yoga, right? Because yoga comes out of Hinduism. I guess a few evangelicals I know are like this as well. Yoga comes out of Hinduism, right? And at least in its like purest Hindu form, there's some kind of spiritual meaning behind different yoga poses. And so I've heard people call it demonic, right? You're summoning demons by doing yoga poses. I'm like, yeah, okay, not sold on that one, but sure, I'm good. But basically, with Gen Z, the tendency is much more to look at something like yoga and be like, okay, this works for me, right? The centering elements, the breathing elements, the meditative element of something like yoga really works. And I'll combine that, with my my whole approach to life to help me answer certain questions, to be more a grounded person, or be more, what's the word? Mindfulness. That's the watchword today. My wife loves pop psychology for like the last 5 years. Everything's been about mindfulness. I'm mindfully waiting for the next silly trend. Mindfulness is not stupid. It's fine. Although we watched a German show called Murder Mindfully, where this guy would control his emotions and then kill people. It was strange in German, but actually kind of amusing because he's like, all right, I'm in trouble. What do I do? She's like, I'm just going to breathe deeply. Right? And then kill people because that was the best way to do things. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I got sidetracked. I'm sorry. They bring a flexible attitude to religious practices because those practices are meant to help them answer questions, find meaning in particular moments, rather than being like, what does Catholicism say I should do right now? Okay, pray the rosary. If I don't like that, right, I'm not going to do that. I'm not beating up on the Catholics today, right? But it could be any religion, right? You go and you do your yoga, and you maybe combine elements of yoga with Catholicism in ways that are unique to you. And this is faith unbundled, right? It's taking little pieces from all over the place and combining it into your own thing, right? So that when you get your, you get your Spotify Wrapped, when you get your religious faith wrapped at the end of your life, when you get to the pearly gates or whatever, right? Everyone's is going to look a little bit different, right? It's going to be this unique, right? You did 84 hours of Kabbalah prayer, and you did 900 hours of yoga, and this kind of thing when you meet your maker. This is faith unbundled, right? And this is the concept that Packard is sort of talking about. What he says is very normal for Gen Z. And I really like it because I think when I look around my kind of casual observations, I see a lot of this, right? I see a lot of people kind of mixing and matching religious practices, right? And different tools and Reiki crystals along with Christianity and Christians who have Buddha statues in their house and all sorts of really interesting things that make for a really kind of unique generational outlook on religion. Okay, before I leave religion altogether, I have to tell you how these two things are connected. So I was in a Q&A with Packard I guess it was a couple of years ago, back in 2021, and I was very lucky. I got to ask one of the questions, because there are thousands of people there. I got to ask the question, and my question was, is this, right, faith unbundled, just a kind of repackaging of the idea of moralistic therapeutic deism, right? Because I can see a lot of ways that they are kind of similar, right? Especially in the instrumental way that they treat religion, right? And treat God. So I think there was something good to my question. Now, Packard kind of immediately jumped on this in a very polite way. It was a very nice conversation. But he said that he's never really cared for the idea of moralistic therapeutic deism, right? He's obviously familiar with it. It's one of these ideas that if you're in the kind of social religion space, everybody knows, because Christian Smith, who came up with it, is such a superstar. But he said he didn't really care for it. And what he said is, moralistic therapeutic deism, in his opinion, makes it seem like for young people, religion is very easy. Okay? It's very easy. It's a kind of low effort thing, right? And again, if you go back to let's zoom back in time. If we go back to the creed of moralistic therapeutic deism, right? This is and this is kind of what Packard is saying, this is a pretty easy thing to believe, right? You got a God who exists. All it asks you to do is be nice, try to be happy, right? And this is the one, right? God doesn't need to be particularly involved in your life, except when he's needed to resolve a problem, and good people go to heaven when they die. Okay, right? And what does Packard say about this? That's really easy, right? It makes it seem like young people aren't thinking about religion very much, that it's like they only think about religion, when God is needed to resolve a problem. And the rest of the time, it sort of is not thought about. And what Packard says is he thinks this is wrong.
The majority of American teenagers...
Don't play. Come on. I knew that was going to happen. I did, I swear. I love that the only question people had is about Mark Carney. Anyway. Okay, so he says that MTD makes religion seem very easy. And I think, I do actually think for millennials, I'm actually a pretty strong believer that millennials ascribe to moralistic therapeutic deism in some sense. And for a lot of millennials, it was quite easy. So why is it different from Faith Unbundled? Okay, so Faith Unbundled. What Packard says is actually like Gen Z is working really hard on religious questions. There's a lot of contemplation. Like this is actually a lot of work, right? And it maybe doesn't look like hard work, right? Because it's like, sometimes a little bit breezy. It combines, tarot cards that you bought off Amazon and Reiki crystals and yoga and whatever kind of practices that people happen to sort of like in really unique ways. But what he says kind of underlies this is a lot of really hard spiritual work and a generation that's really interested in spiritual questions, but they're just not satisfied with the answers that they find from single sources. So they're actually doing a lot of work trying to figure out what their religious identities are, how, reconstructing notions of God in different ways, trying to figure out what that means, what practices are meaningful to them, how they can combine it with the traditions they come out of or no traditions at all, right? They're doing a ton of really, really hard work around, and again, you don't always see it because it's happening on a very personal level, right? It's happening, in your bedroom, with tarot cards or, not out in public, certainly not in, maybe an institutional context like a church, but it is, he thinks, happening because this is what young people talk about, and this is how they talk about their relationship to religious faith. My pen has died. Or something has happened. I can note, there we go. My pen has died. Goodbye, pen. It might have not been charging. Okay, well, we'll leave it for today anyway. So, that's, I think, the key difference between, MTD and Faith Unbundled is one is suggesting that religion for young people is pretty straightforward and simple, and the other one is suggesting that it is a lot of really hard work and that young people are doing a lot of really hard work. They're deeply engaged with questions of religion, just not in a very traditional way. Okay. Do I have any thoughts on Mark Carney being our PM? Why do I get this question in every class? I got this question in SOC 100 yesterday too. Why do people want to know my opinion about politics? Okay, I will tell you because someone asked, and I don't know why. Again, my opinion is like anyone else's. It's worth about the same. I read his book, and it kind of frightens me. It's Pi Day. It is Pi Day. Anyway, sorry, distraction. Mark Carney's book kind of scares me because it sounds like what Mark Carney wants from us is for the government to stand in and control a lot of aspects of everything, especially like what you're allowed to do and what you're allowed to buy, all based on this idea of net zero. And maybe that sounds great in principle. I just hate the idea of people controlling my life. So he scares the crap out of me, but Pierre Poilievre scares the crap out of me in different ways. As I said to my SOC 100 class, there's this very famous quote from Denis Diderot from the Enlightenment that said, "Man will never be free until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest." And I'm like, that sounds like a fun weekend project. So, I will say I find all politicians to be truly despicable. And any of them that tell you that they have your best interest at heart are lying. They're liars. Filthy, filthy liars. So, discern very carefully. Or we're all doomed. I'm going to go with that. But keep in mind, I haven't voted for a mainstream political party in this country since I was in my 20s, right? And I'm in my 40s now, because this is my feelings about it. And you can take my opinion for what it's worth, which frankly is precisely nothing. Okay. We have 6 minutes left. Do you want to talk about crime for 6 minutes? No? I could talk. No? Okay. We do not want to. And unfortunately, if you're at home, you can't do anything because you're not here. The consensus in the room is please don't talk about crime for 6 minutes. Let us go. Let us go. All right. Like Moses with the Egyptians, or with the Hebrews in Egypt, I release you for my last religious metaphor of the day.